Okay. Okay. So today is the yard site of the Rambam, but we first have to mention that today's shir is being sponsored by David Dayan, the Ilu Nishmis, his uncle Jimmy Dayan, and his yard site. He was just nifter last week. We're still in the middle of the shiva. His name is Chaim ben David Dayan. He's Neshama Shrav and Aliyah. So today is also the yard site of the Rambam. So my favorite story about the Rambam, or comment about the Rambam, is what Beryl Wine says. Beryl Wine says, you see from the Rambam the irony of the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rambam introduced a revolutionary idea of codifying. Thank you. Of codifying the whole Torah, and he said, and it was very revolutionary. It was very controversial. As a matter of fact, there was a tremendous backlash. But he said, the Rambam said, after my sefer, no other sefer will ever be needed. Zok Beryl Wine, there's no sefer that prompted the writing of more Sfarim than the Rambam itself. And that's the irony of how the Rebbeinu Shalom made the world.
He was the first that codified all the mitzvahs?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah. And it's brought down that the Rambam was originally supported by his brother, Rabbi Avram ben Maimon, who was a diamond merchant. And this Rabbi Avram perished at sea. He died in a marine accident where he drowned, and everything was lost. But not only did he lose his entire net worth because he had all of his jewels that he was selling, he was carrying the money of many people. So he took down many people with him, and it put a lot of pressure on the Rambam's family. And that's when the Rambam became a doctor, because he had to be financed himself. And the Rambam actually got very sick from it, and he ended up moving to Egypt. The Rambam didn't start off in Egypt. I believe the Rambam was born in Spain.
That's right.
Spain, then he was in Morocco. He didn't have a good life. He was moving around. He finally settled in Egypt, where he became very well known for his medical practice, and his name reached far and wide that the Sultan himself demoted his Persian doctor and let him take care of the opposition party's needs, and the king and the Sultan were treated by the Rambam, and this doctor didn't take too kindly to it. So what he did is he came up with a scheme, and he told the Sultan that the Rambam is trying to kill you, and I'm going to prove it. So the Sultan says, you better be able to prove it, because if you don't prove it, you're going to be killed. So he said, this is what we're going to do. In those days, it was believed that if you had ingested poison and you were going to die, a stronger and more powerful poison would be the antidote to the lower poison. So what he did is he told the king, we're going to have the following challenge. We're each going to bring poisons, and we're going to see who's actually more capable of creating the more potent poison. And what we're going to do is I'm going to drink the Persian doctor says, I will drink yours, and then I'll drink mine, and I'm going to live, because my poison is actually better than your poison. So mine will be the more powerful one. You're going to drink mine and then yours. So if your poison is stronger, you'll live. But one of the two are going to die. So when this was proposed to the king and to the Rambam says, but this is a terrible idea, because then you're going to die, doctor. You're going to end up dying, because the Rambam knew, of course, that he was far superior to the Persian doctor. So the Persian doctor, like all of the Democrats, they're saying, no, I'm not worried. Everything's going to be fine. We're going to win the election. So the appointed day came. So it's brought down. The Rambam went back to his normal daily schedule of learning, but he's thinking to himself, what is the plan of this guy? He knows to make a much more powerful poison. So what is his plan? Like he's got to have a plan. He's not coming to be suicidal here. So Rambam thinks it over, and the Rambam says, so they come the next day, and the king tells the Sultan, you know what, Mr. Sultan? I'm sorry, the Sultan tells the Persian doctor, Mr. Doctor, you're so confident, you're going to go first. So they each took the bottle of poison that they brought, and they poured it over half into one glass, half into another glass. So now you have 4 glasses, 2 of the Rambam's poison, 2 of the doctor's poison. And the doctor first takes the Rambam's poison, and then he takes his poison. And he's looking pretty good. He's looking pretty good. Right? Then the king says, okay, Rambam, it's your turn. So the Rambam first drank the Persian doctor's poison, then drank his poison, and he's also looking good. Didn't take 10, 15 minutes. The Persian doctor starts to suffer, and he falls down, and he collapses, and he dies. So the king says, the Sultan said, no, Nishkaferlich, I didn't like him anyway. He was an arrogant SOB anyway. Nishkaferlich, I'm happy. I wanted to do away with him. This way he took care of himself. So he asked the Rambam, what did you do? So the Rambam says, let's make a l'chaim on my poison. So the king says, what are you kidding me? You want to kill me with your poison? Your poison is the most potent poison around. He said, no, don't worry about it. My poison is nothing. He says, let me tell you what happened. I'm thinking to myself, what is this doctor's plan? He knows my poison is stronger. So what's his plan? So I think what he was going to do is he would drink a weaker time delay poison that he will concoct for himself. He'll drink that not here. He'll drink that before he comes. And he'll assume that my poison, which over here in this moment he's going to drink first, and he'll assume that my poison is stronger, so my poison will save him from his weaker poison that he had at home. And the poison that he claimed he brought was just plain colored water, and it was nothing, because I knew that he was relying on my poison to save him from his poison. So I did the same thing. I also just brought plain water. So what happened was he drank my plain water. I put a little bit of coloring into it. He drank my plain water, which means his time delay poison took him out eventually because he didn't have an antidote. And I knew he was going to bring in plain water with coloring in it. So I drank his plain water. I drank my plain water. King, would you like some? So the king realized that not only is the Rambam a good doctor, he's also a major pikech. That's how the story goes. But it's brought down. The Rambam gets your Shemayim. The Rambam was revolutionary. I mean, our halachas today, many of them are based on the Rambam. So Schusay Yogin Aleinu, Kol Yisrael. Okay, so today we're learning very, very important halachas in Isurim. So we're going to learn about 3 concepts today. The first concept that we're going to learn about today is Tam Ke'ikr. We know the halacha is if you have one piece of treifa meat and you cook it with 2 pieces of kosher meat, we know really normally chad b'trei bottle, which means if I have 2 pieces of kosher meat and 1 piece of non-kosher meat, the iser is bottle b'roif. But since when we cooked all these meats together, the taste of the iser ends up permeating the other kosher pieces of meat in the pot, we say tam kikar, the taste of a food is just like the food itself. So the other foods in the pot that were cooked with the iser, that absorb the taste of the iser, are considered iser. And therefore, we need to make it bottle b'shishim. We need to be mevatel the tam as well. But there's that concept of tam kikar. Now, of course, tam kikar only means that if the tam of the iser permeates the heter also becomes iser. Today, we're going to be introduced to a new concept called heter mitzdarf iser. And that is, if I have a half a kazayis of chalev, and I have a half a kazayis of shuman, and they're not cooked together, but they're together, if I eat them, it's as if I ate a kazayis of chalev. Now, I'm really misspeaking, because this halach of heter mitzdarf iser does actually not apply to the iser of chalev. It only applies to a limited list of isurim that the Gemara is going to discuss. But it's more chomer than tam ke'ikr, because tam ke'ikr only affects other things if its taste permeates those other things. Heter mitzdarf iser is even if the taste of the iser did not permeate the heter, we'll still say that the heter is mitzarf to the iser to make a shear. So that's a very big chumrah. That's a very big chumrah, and that's only again applied to a very limited set of isurim. And then there's a third concept that we're going to discuss today, and that is kazayis b'chtei achilas pras. What if I have a mixture with iser inside it, and if I eat this mixture within the time of achilas pras, which is a shaila if it's between 2 and 9 minutes, I've eaten a kezayis of Isser in that time. So there's a Isser there as well, because we know in a normal achila, you would have consumed a kezayis of Isser. So that's another concept that we're going to learn about today. Kezayis b'chtei achilas pras is not only relevant with Isser, it's also relevant to brachas. For instance, you make a bracha achroina on a food if you eat a kezayis b'chtei achilas pras, or if you drink a revius b'chtei achilas pras. So b'chtei achilas pras is an interesting concept that's very relevant to us. So let's see where the Gemara takes us today. Amar Abavo, Amar B'Yechanan. Kol isurin shabbatayra. All of the isurin in the Torah, ein heter mitzdaref l'isur. This huge chumrah that we introduced does not apply to the vast majority of isurin shabbatayra, chutz me'isurei nazir, except for the isur of nazir. Sharei amar Torah mishras. Zokt Rashi. Sharei amar Torah mishras. It's mishras anovim lo yishte, which means anything that's soaked in wine, you're not allowed to drink. Chayev al shriyos pita b'yayin. So if you soak your bread in wine, you're going to be mechuyev for eating that bread. V'ika miyayin lechuda kezayis lama likra. If there's a kezayis of wine absorbed into this piece of bread, I don't need an extra pasuk to tell me that by soaking the bread in wine, it becomes usher, because I'm drinking wine, the wine that's absorbed in the bread. So therefore, it must be telling me that even if there's not a kezayis of wine in the bread, but the wine together with the bread in total adds up to a kezayis, the nazir will still violate his naziris. So you see this concept of heter mitzaref l'isur. So by nazir, since it says mishras, we learn that heter is mitzaref l'isur, which is a very big chiddush. Uzeiri Amar, Ziri says that this is not something that's only exclusive by nazir; it applies to an additional place as well. Af sa'or bal taktiru. We learned yesterday that there's an isur to be maktir chametz on the mizbeach, which means all of the karbanos of mincha, we must be very careful to make sure that they don't become chametz. So Tziri, there also I would hold that heter mitzdaref l'isur. How do you get that, Zoktamor? Kaman Krabelazar the Darish Koil. This goes back all the way to Pesach. That's where we're starting from. We're actually learning Mesechus Psachim. In Mesechus Psachim, Rabbi Lazar said that Taruvas Chametz is also also on Pesach with a lav, because it says Kol Machametzes Lo Shechelu, and from the Kol we include even Taruvas Chametz. Zokt Rashi, L'Hasam Nafkaloi. That's what we learned. Kedamin Il Miktasai Minayin Talmud Loimer Koil. V'Dorish Lahochi Miktasai Minayin, which is Chatzi Zayis Saor, the Chatzi Zayis Matzah Imoi. Taruvas Chametz is that you don't have a full kazayis of sor, you have a half kazayis of sor in the mix, and the fact that there's a mix of chametz in here, Rabbi Lazar is learning that it's going to be osir. So you see, referring to the pasuk of kol saor loisik teru menu, you see by haktara as well. In fact, the Gemara, if you see it by saor because of the kol, well then go back to Pesach as well. Ihachi le'inyin chametz bePesach nami. The same drasha of kol by saor of karbonis that we're learning, Rabbi Lezer holds, will say that heter mitzaref le'isur, that the makor of that, where Rabbi Lezer said it, was really by chametz bePesach. So oy bezoi by chametz bePesach, you should also say this halacha of heter mitzaref le'isur. So now we're up to 3 places in the Torah. It started off with the first halacha of Rabbi Yochanan, which was a surei nazir. Zeiri spread it to be makriv chametz on the mizbeach, and now the Gemara is suggesting it should also apply to chametz for Pesach. So Rashi Damrin al Aruve Belav. We say that Taruvas chametz is an ishalav. Mahanyu nami heter mitzdaref l'isur. That's also a case of heter mitzdaref l'isur. Zok to Gemara, you're right. Ein hachanami. According
is this a derisa or derabbanan?
Heter mitzdaref
The
l'isur.
chumrah, didn't you call it a chumrah? So how could it be a lav?
It's the Raisa. The way Zeiri is learning, it's going to be a deraisa. It's a derisive chomer. I just meant to say that it's a big stringency to say that you don't even need to have a kazayas of iser, as long as in total
In
what you
order
need.
to be
Yeah.
over the
Lav,
derisive.
you get malchus, yeah. So Zok Gemara using this Taruvis issue of Rebbe Lazar to tell you that means heter mitzdarfel iser. Well, it should apply to chametz as well. So Gemara Eina Chanami. Of course, Ziri agrees that it applies to chametz as well. So now, again, it applies in three places according to Ziri. So why didn't Ziri say that? Why did Ziri just say that it only applies to being makter chametz on the mizbeach? Because Ziri wasn't really addressing any other case in the Torah. Ziri had a point to make specifically by being makter karbanis. He had a special point that he wanted to make, and the point that he wanted to make is that we disagree with Abaye. The Amar Yesh Haktorah Lapachas Mikazayis. According to Abaye, you could make a Haktorah, it's considered a Haktorah even less than a Kazayis. So I don't need the whole concept of Heter, Mitzarefel Isser, so that I have a share of a Kazayis to make my Haktorah Visser. Because according to Abaye, take the Heter away from here, any minuscule little chametz that you're makter is also Haktorah, and you'd also be over. So according to Abaye, you don't even need Heter Mitzarefel Isser for Haktorah. So the reason why Zeiri pointed out that Heter Mitzarefel Isser applies by Haktorah is because he wanted to make a point. We don't hold like Abaye. Kamash Malon, Haktorah Lav Lepachas Mikazayis. So of course they ask, well, it says many times in the Torah, it says Kol Dam Lo Yisechelu, Kol Chelav Lo Yisechelu. How come the Gemara is not suggesting in all those places as well that Heter Mitzarefel Isser? So the Mefarshim answer is that all of those coils have specific things that needs to be marba. In case of dam, there's different types of damim that the Gemara is being marba. There's different types of chelav, and in each case, there's a special reason why the Gemara says we need kol. But in this case, the kol was only to tell us taruvas, and therefore we learn that heter mitzaref le'iser. Now, when I say the Mefarshim speak out, what I mean is I heard it from Rabbi Elephant, and I wasn't able to remember who he quoted it from, so I just say from the Mefarshim. That's what I usually mean. Zog to Gemara weiter. Yosef Ravdimi v'ka'amur lo lahashmaitze. Ravdimi said over this halacha that Rabbi Yochanan said, earth-shattering, that there's something called heter mitzaref le'iser. So Omer le Abaye le Ravdimi. Abaye challenged Ravdimi. V'chol di surin shebetayra ein heter mitzaref le'iser. You make it sound like it's an exclusive thing that only applies to mishras. It only applies to nazir. I'm going to show you that this is a common theme by all Yisurim. But now we learned ha-mikveh shel truma. So a mikveh is similar to what we know as a mikveh that we tovel in. A mikveh is a porridge. It's a thick, congealed type of liquid. So not much different than how we understand a regular mikveh. So vatan ha-mikveh shel truma. If you had a porridge of truma, vashum v'hashemen shel chulin, and there was spices like garlic and oil. Well, oil is not a spice, but there were some non-major ingredients, minor ingredients of chulin that were mixed in. Now we know all about tful yoms because we're experts. We just finished the sugya of Reb Chanina's Kana Kehanim, and we know that the lowest level of tumah that exists by chulin is a sheni. The lowest level of tumah that exists by truma is a shlishi, and that's called posel because it cannot convey the tumah further. We also know that normally the lowest level of tumah that a human being can reach is a rishon. The exception to that is a tful yoim. Somebody who was tummy and he toiveled, really he's completely tar. But there's a pasuk that teaches us that a tful yoim, even though he's tahar, he has the status of a sheni, so that if he touches truma, he'll make that truma into a shlishi and he'll passel the truma. So the halacha over here was, if you had a mikveh, you had a porridge that had in it small components of ingredients of chulin, v'naga tful yoim b'miksasan, and a tful yoim touched part of the mix, part of the shum and the shemen, passel as kulan, we say that the whole kedera becomes passel, and Rashi tells us because passel is called there, the mikveh ikar, the main dish is the mikveh, which for yoim passel is truma. So basically, what we're saying is that the shemen and the shum will be bottled. We look at it like one big mikveh, and therefore, when the tefillah touched it, the whole thing becomes possible. What if it was the opposite case? Ha-mikveh shel chulin. What if the porridge was chulin? So the vast majority of the components here, the contents here, was chulin. V'ashum v'ashemen shel truma. And there's only a minor ingredients of truma. V'naga tfil yoyim b'miktsasam. And the tfil yoyim touched part of the mix. And of course, it would have come into contact. The tfil yoyim would have come into contact with some shum and shemen as well in the mix. There we say like pasal ella mokai makoy b'lvad. There, since roiv of it is not truma, we say that he only passels the little area that he touched. And the Gemara asked on this Mishnah, Mokai magoy amai psula. Why should the mokai magoy be passel at all? Habatli luhu tavlim b'roiv. The tavlim which were truma is bottled in the roiv of the mikveh, which is chulin. And Rashi states, how could you say that? Don't we know that truma, you have to be mevatel on 100? It's not enough to be mevatel b'roiv. So Rashi, the Kasoka Daitach, when the Gemara asked that kasha, the Gemara thought that the imua midirabanan hu the aser. The imua is only aser midirabanan, and therefore the imua means when truma gets mixed into chulin, it's only aser midirabanan. Lamaila miroiv, and therefore the Gemara asks, why would it be possible? Why don't you say he's only talking that little bit? Habatlu talman b'roiv. So why do you say even a little bit is usher, nothing should be usher? I'll tell you why we're being machmer to say that there's some part that's tameh here. If a zar ate a kazayis of this porridge, a zar would get malchus. So Rabbi Bar Chana, Rashi tells us, is saying, I'm disagreeing with your premise. You are assuming that there's only an Isser D'Rabbanan here. Zogt Rabbi Bar Chana, you're wrong. Dimua midaraisa. This is mixed chulin and truma. There's an Isser D'Raisa that it's not bottled. And therefore, v'zar loika lov b'kazayis. If a zar ate a kazayis of this porridge, he would get malchus for it. Mishum de yeshem truma Allah. This whole mix now has an identification of truma because of the miyut of the shum and the shemen that was mixed into it. Zok Rashi hilchach lagabatuma nami. Therefore, lagabatuma as well, we'll say that shem truma Allah. If it's truma, so why don't you say the whole thing becomes possible like when the roy was mikveh? Zok Rashi miu lechamirika truma atzma livsalas kula. Even though the chumrah of truma, we treat it like truma, and we say that if a zar eats a kazayis of it, he'll get malchus. Nevertheless, we still don't make it mamash like truma. It's still only a mix. Umay time a zar loika lov b'kazayis mishum zaris. There's no isra truma here because we just said a second ago that only a little bit becomes tamei. So the reason why the zar would get malchus for eating a kazayis of this mix is because we consider it lagabi isra achila. We consider it truma, and he was a Yisrael. He wasn't allowed to eat truma. Haloy ochal kazayis truma. So if he didn't eat a kazayis of truma, the problem is he didn't eat a kazayis of truma. When he ate a kazayis of this mix, it only had a small content of truma, the shuma and the shemen. So by eating a kazayis of this mix, he did not eat the kazayis of truma. So why is it that Rabbi Bar Chana said that you get a zar will get malchus if he eats a kazayis of this mixture? In fact, he shouldn't get malchus if he ate a kazayis of this mixture, because if he ate a kazayis of this mixture, he did not eat a kazayis of truma. So it must be lav mishum dehetem mitzdarf l'isser. The only reasonable explanation that anyone could find as to why Rabbi Bar Chana would say that a zar gets malchus for eating this mix is because the heter is mitzdarf l'isser. So why are you Rabbi Yochanan saying that there's an exclusive heter mitzdarf l'isser that only applies to certain items such as mishras by a nazir, maybe by Pesach, maybe by being makriv chametz on the mizbeach? You see, it applies to chulin and truma as well. So that's not why a zar will get malchus for it if he eats a mere kazayis of this mikveh. My kazayis dika kazayis b'tei achilas pras. Ukazayis b'tei achilas pras da'iraisi. I misspoke. The Ika Kazais B'Dechilas Pras. The Isser here is not that he's only eating a Kazais of this mix, and therefore you have to say that Hetem Mitzaref Lisser. He's eating a whole bunch of this mix. But what we're saying is within the span of Kedei Achilas Pras, however long that is, he's able to eat enough of this mikveh that'll actually end up eating a full Kazais of Truma. And that's why we say that he gets Malchus. So let's see Rashi, the beautiful Rashi on this. Umashadi my look at the kazais takamar kazais bechtechilas pras shemachol pras menu shir arba beitzim. So now Rashi tells us the shir of achilas pras is the amount that's equal to about 4 eggs, and if he ate 4 eggs worth of this mikveh yesh by kazais truma, he would have consumed a kazais of truma. V'kaimalon the kol shiurei achilas iser, all the shiurim for achilas iser ben kazais shel chela v'dam. Your eating is all combined if you eat it within that amount of time. If you ate a tiny little bit of chaylev at a time, but he consumed the full kazais within that time, if you didn't take longer than how much it would normally take to eat a pras. When you eat normally, mitzdarf will be mitzdarf, and it would be like you ate it all together. So v'hachanami yesh kan truma. There's enough content of truma in this mix. Kedei litzdarf kazayis v'achilas pras mimenu. If you ate an achilas pras of this mix, you would have consumed the full kazayis of truma. Frank the Gemara. Are you arguing that kazais b'dechilas pras is deraisa, and therefore you're arguing you get malchus for it? Deraisi amalei. So Rabbi said in. As a matter of fact, absolutely. Dr. Gemara ihachi. I'm sorry, this is not Rabbi Barchana talking. The Raya was from Rabbi Barchana. This is Abaye talking. Right? It's Abaye and Rabdimi talking. So amalei in echanami. Amalei in ihachi back to Gemara. So now we're going to go back to our sugya. We know that we had a machloikis of teruvas chametz. Rabbi Lazar held there was a law for teruvas chametz. The Rabbanon in the Brisa on Daf Mem Beis and Beis said that the Rabbanon holds you don't get malchus for teruvas chametz. And what was the example of teruvas chametz? Kutach. So kutach means that there's a small amount of bread mixed in to the kutach, and since it's only a teruvas, the Rabbanan said that you don't get malchus for it. But the problem is, if you eat a kazayis of it, v'chdei achilas pras, so then you've eaten a kazayis of the bread itself in that period of time. So why do the Rabbanan argue on Rabbi Lezer by kutach habavli and say that you don't get malchus for it? You should get malchus for it because you're eating a kazayis v'chdei achilas pras. Elamai, what are you going to? So what do you want? What are you arguing with me? That it must be that mishum hetem starf iser. You want to say that the reason why by mikveh you get malchus is because of hetem starf iser, and not because of kazayis b'chelas, and not because of kazayis b'chelas pras. That doesn't help you at all. Soif, am I pligi rabbanon alei rabbalos b'kutach habavli? You're still going to have the same problem because hetem starf iser. The rabbanon should hold that you get malchus for the kutach habavli. So you're not helping us anyway. So the rabbanon is still a problem. Why they hold there's no Isser, whether it's because of your argument that Hetem and Starfel Isser applies everywhere, or whether it's because of the argument that you're eating Kazais, Bechteh Achilas Pras, either way, you have a problem understanding the Rabbanan, and you're going to have to come up with a side svara. Let's ignore Kudach Habavli, the less Be Kazais, Bechteh Achilas Pras. Let's say that there's such a low content of Chametz in the Kutach that you don't have a Kazais, Bechteh Achilas Pras. Why? If you eat it normally, how do you eat kutach? By dipping food into it. So if you're going to eat it directly, so that you can gobble up enough that you'll eat a kazayis b'chleil pras, well, that's batla daite. Eitzel kaladim. That's not a normal achila. And if you're going to eat it normally by dipping into it, less bay kazayis b'chleil pras, you'll never have a kazayis b'chleil pras. So this Gemara seems like a benign Gemara, but in fact, this Gemara teaches us a huge shaila, because the lacha of kazayis b'chtei achil pras. How does it work? Is there a fixed time of what a normal food takes? How long it takes to eat that? And let's say that's 3 minutes. And therefore, any issue that you eat, you have to eat a kazais of it within 3 minutes. Or you look at each type of food that it is, and you see how much time does it normally take to eat a pras of this type of food. And therefore, if I eat a kazais of this type of food within that period of time, then I'm over. Because we'll all agree that different foods take different times to eat. A glass of water takes a couple of seconds to eat, but a hot coffee can take 15 minutes to drink, which would not be b'tel chilas pras. So if you hold that there's a fixed time that all different foods have to subscribe to, then a cup of coffee would likely not be drank b'tel chilas pras, and you wouldn't make a bar nefashos. But on the flip side, if you look at each Michael as to how it's eaten, then your cup of coffee takes 15 minutes, so that would be a proper drinking, and you would make a bar nefashos. So let's look at what this Gemara is saying. This Gemara is saying, kutach, you don't need b'chtei chilas pras. What are you talking about? If the normal way to eat kutach is over a longer period of time, then for kutach, the chedei chilas pras is longer. So why is the Gemara saying here that it's not b'chtei chilas pras? So there are those who bring a raya from this Gemara that there's a fixed chedei chilas pras, and no matter what type of food it is, it has to conform. And therefore, a cup of coffee, which you drink in 15 minutes, even though that's the normal way to drink it, nevertheless, since it doesn't conform to the whatever standard of kedei chilas pras is, you do not make a bar nefashos on coffee, which is in fact the way the Mishnah Berurah paskins. The Mishnah Berurah says if you want to make a bar nefashos on coffee, leave over a revis of coffee for the end where it's cold, that you could gulp down quickly, and then you could make a bar nefashos. But normally you can't. But there are those who say that we don't have a raya here from kutach. Why? Because kutach is not the chametz either. What is the chametz of kutach? The breadcrumbs that you mixed into it. Bread, the shear of achilas pras for bread is a short shear. You eat bread relatively quickly. So therefore, you can't say because it's kutach, I have a longer time to eat the bread. The kutach still has to conform to the shear achilas pras of bread. But this Gemara is brought down as the raya to this shaila. When you have a warm drink, is it considered kedei chilas pras because you're drinking the warm drink at its normal rate, or you look at a standardized time of kedei chilas pras that whatever you eat has to conform to? Zok the hele Gemara weiter. Eisvei, fragt the Gemara kasha. Shtei kederes. You had two pots. Achas shel chulin, ba'achas shel truma. One was chulin, one was truma. V'lefnein, and in front of them were shnei meduchos, two mortars, which are little containers that you've ground spices in. Achas shel chulin, v'achas shel truma. And your mazel was v'naflu elu l'taych elu. So you thought Murphy's following you around, and your mazel is that the spices fell in to the portions of truma, and you don't know which fell into what. So we say today's your lucky day. Murphy stops here, and we say mutarin. Why? Shani oimer truma l'soicha truma nafla v'chulin l'soich chulin nafla. We'll say l'kula that the truma fell into truma, chulin fell into chulin. So the original box of chulin that you have remains chulin. Frek the Gemara. If you're going to subscribe to this halacha, that if you eat a kazayis of this within an achilas pras, midaraisa there's an isser, well then you're playing with fire here, because this isn't a safek drabanan anymore that you say batal b'roiv. This is a safek deraisa, because you might eat a full kazayis of truma in the process of eating from this box that has the tava mixed into it. For safek tomorrow, the amid kazayis b'chayil deraisa amai. Why could I be makel and assume that the truma fell into the truma? And the makel, I'm playing with an isur deraisa that actually has a chiyav misa b'dei shemayim. Amarlei, he answered him back, Hanech l'trumas tavla d'rabanan. Truma of spices is not midaraisa; it's only midarabanan. So since the whole thing is only midarabanan, even if you had a kazayis b'tei chedei chilas pras, there would still only be an isur derabanan, and therefore we're makel. I'm going to ask you from truma deraisa. Shtei kupos. You had two boxes of produce. Achas shel chulin v'achas shel truma. V'lefneim beisoyin achas shel chulin v'achas shel truma. V'naflu elu l'toich elu. The halacha is mutarin for the same reason. Shani Omer chulun said chulun naflu, and truma said truma nafla. The Yamid kazayis b'dechil as fast Raisa. Amay Amrin and Shani Omer. This is also midrabanan. Hanachla truma bisman azed derabanan. Truma bisman azed is midrabanan. So we're talking about truma derabanan. Why is truma bisman azed midrabanan? Either because the Rambam says that until all of Klal Yisrael or Rov of Klal Yisrael is back in Eretz Yisrael, we don't have a chiyuv to bring trumas, or there are those who learn that it's kitchen rishona, kitchen l'shaita, and not lasad lavoi, so there's no more kedusha zaretz. So now that we finished challenging this shaila of Mishras, let's review what we have. We learned a huge chiddush from Mishras. Rabbi Yochanan taught us a huge chiddush from Mishras that's stated by Nazir that heter is mitzaref lizer. Frank the Gemara, Mishras lahachiv da'asa. Mishras is telling you have an extra word. Mishras, you think, to tell you heter mitzaref lizer. We need Mishras to teach us a lesser chiddush. Because we learned as follows: Mishras litain tam ki'ikr. Mishras actually teaches us the halach of tam ki'ikr, like we discussed earlier. That is the makor of tam ki'ikr l'chol haTorah kula. Shem shara anovim b'mayim. If you soaked grapes in water, and now you took the grapes out, the yesh b'hem tam yayin, and the water now has the tam of wine, chayiv, you'll be chayiv for drinking a kazayis of water. Zokt Rashi, v'halav mishum heter mitzaref li'isru. This is not because of heter mitzaref li'isru. Ela mishum dis avid le'kula yisr. It's because the whole water became yisr, because the whole water absorbed the tam of the grapes. Aval heter mitzaref li'isr, which is a bigger chiddush, lo yafinu minah. How could you learn the greater chiddush of heter mitzaref li'isr if we needed to teach you the lesser chiddush of tam ki'ikr? And the Gemara says weiter, nikanat adon l'chol haTorah kula. And from here we learn l'chol haTorah kula, which is interesting because when Rabbi Yochanan said that we learn from Mishras that heter mitzaref li'isr, that was not exported anywhere in the Torah. That was an exclusive halacha that applied only to Nazir. But now that we're learning tam ki'ikr, we are exporting this halacha l'chol haTorah kula, and we're going to soon see what's the difference. So, fact the Gemara, how do we know l'chol haTorah kula? Just because we know by Nazir tam ki'ikr, how do you know to apply to l'chol haTorah kula? So, tomorrow kal v'chomer u'ma Nazir she'en isurei iser olam she'en isurei iser olam. Nazir is not usher forever. He's only usher for 30 days, or even if he specified a longer period of time, eventually it'll be over. Ve'en isurei iser hana. A Nazir may have hana from wine, he just may not drink it. And v'yesh heter li'surei, he can go to a chacham and be shayil on his nether. So there's so many leniencies built into Nazir. Nevertheless, it has the chumrah of asaboy tam ki'ikr. Kalayim, she'isuri iser olam. Kalayim, which is a much more serious iser than Nazir, because it's usher forever. The isuri iser ana, and the iser of Kalayim is in iser ana. Vein heter li'surei. There's no way you could remove the iser of Kalayim. So it's much more chomer than Nazir. Ein din sheyasa tam ki'ikr. Wouldn't you know from there as well that you say tam ki'ikr? And Arla, although it doesn't have the last chumrah of its Yisuri Yisur Eilam, because Arla expires after 3 years, but it has 2 chumras, so you should still be able to make the same kal v'chomer. So, Frank the Gemara, how could you say that you learn from Mishras that heter mitzaref li'isr, we need it for tam ki'ikr? So, Gemara Hamani Rabbanani, this is going according to the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Kiva, who doesn't use this pasuk of Mishras for tam ki'ikr. Rabbi Kiva has another makor for tam ki'ikr. He doesn't learn it from this pasuk, and therefore he has the pasuk of Mishras available to teach him the halacha of heter mitzaref li'isr. So we have to analyze a couple of things. First of all, the halacha is ein masirin min hadin. You cannot give malchus. You cannot punish somebody with a kal v'chomer. So if we're learning l'chol haTorah kula tam ki'ikr from the kal v'chomer of Nazir, how does it work? So there are those who hold you don't get malchus for it. You don't get malchus for tam ki'ikr. There are those who hold actually it's even only with the Rabbanan. But there are those who learn that this kal v'chomer is not really a kal v'chomer. It's a gilui that tam is ki'ikr. And once we know tam is ki'ikr, we learn that b'chol haTorah kula. There's another interesting svara that the Rishonim say and that is as follows. No, I believe this is not the Rishonim. I believe this is from the Achronim. It said over. I believe it said over from the Imre Emes. I think he spelled out from the Imre Emes. It's a beautiful word. When do you say Ein Masir Medin? That's if I want to create a new Isser Lechatchila with a Kal V'chomer. And the reason why you say Ein Masir Medin is because you're saying if the Kal has this Einish, so too the Chomer should have this Einish. Who said maybe this Einish isn't good enough for the Chomer? Maybe it won't be a Kapara. So therefore you can't be Masir Medin. However, by Kalayim, by Arla, the Torah already said what the Einish is for it. We're just using the Kal V'chomer to say when that Isser applies. But the Einish for it, we already know because the Torah already told us what Kalayim is and what Arla is. So now that the Gemara says that we have our Rabbi Kiva, who learns Tam Kikar from a different place, let's have a look. Hi, Rabbi Kiva. Ilema Rabbi Kiva de Masnisin. Live with the Rabbi Kiva the Mishnah. The time Rabbi Kiva Aimer, Nozir, Sheshara, Pite Beyayin, V'yesh Boy Latzaref, Kedei Kezayis, a Nozir that soaked his bread in wine, and there's enough bread that it's a Kezayis, Chayiv, it's Chayiv, Frek the Gemara, Umimai, Umipas, Umiyayin. How do you know? So where is the Rabbi Kiva? Where is the Rabbi Kiva who's telling us that heter mitzaref le'iser? Where is this Rabbi Kiva who tells us that heter mitzaref le'iser? If it's from Nozer Shashara Pita B'Yayin V'yesh B'Kedei Latzaref Kedei Kazayis Chayiv Umimaydim Pasum B'Yayin, who said in that case of Nozer Shashara Pita B'Yayin we needed to combine the pas that was not absorbed with wine together with wine to get to Kazayis Dilma B'Yayin L'Chudei. Maybe there was enough wine in that pas to be mechayiv you a kazayis for the wine alone. In fact, the Gemara, why would you say that's pshat in the brisa? If you're going to say there's no chiddush if there's actually a kazayis of wine there, so why would I need a chiddush to tell me that they're to get malchus? Zok the Gemara, there would be a chiddush. Hakamash v'lon dafagav the taruvos. You might think a nazir only gets malchus for yain ben. But yain mixed in, maybe the Nazir doesn't have a problem with that. Kamash Malon, that even yain al-yidei taruvish is a problem. So there, we don't have a proof that heter mitzaref l'isser. Ela Rabbi Kiva de Brisa. It's going to be a Rabbi Kiva of a Brisa. The Tanya Rabbi Kiva Aimer, Nazir shashar pita b'yayin, v'achal kezayis mipas u'miyayin. So there it's saying explicitly that in order to get the kezayis, he had to combine the pas with the yayin, and there it's chayiv. So Rabbi Kiva holds that heter is mitzaref l'isser by Nazir. You see it over here, and he learns it from Mishras. Now the Rabbanan who used Mishras for Tam Kikar will not learn this halacha of heter mitzaref l'isser. So frek the Gemara, now that Rabbi Kiva uses Mishras to tell you heter mitzaref l'isser, how does he know the smaller chiddush of Tam Kikar? Rabbi Kiva Tam Kikar we know. So tomorrow yalef mi basa b'chalav. He can learn it out of basa b'chalav. Lav time of almu. When you cook the milk, when you cook the meat in milk, and now you take the meat out. There's no milk here. All you have in the meat is the tam of the milk. So it's only tam. V'aser. So therefore, hakadami leishna, for the challah terakula, you would know from basar b'chalav the tam is kicker. In fact, the more you can't bring a rye from basar b'chalav. For abundant, basar b'chalav like amrina, the chiddushu. Basar b'chalav is an off-the-charts chiddush. Just because you see the concept of tam kicker by basar b'chalav, there's no reason why I would apply it to challah terakula. Umay chiddush, ilema. Why is it a chiddush? If you're going to say, because Be'etzim there's nothing usher about milk, and there's nothing usher about meat, and somehow when you combine them, they become usher, that's a chiddush. So it's not such a chiddush. Kalayim nami. If you have kalayim, the two individual minim are in fact regular kosher minim. Uvadodi, the fact that you plant them together, usher. So that's not a chiddush. Ella, I'll tell you what the chiddush of basar b'chalav is. The Torah lekula yom b'chal b'shari. If you soak meat in milk for a week, it's going to be mutter. It doesn't matter. Bashulei, bishulei, usher. But the moment you put heat to it, suddenly it's usher. That's a chiddush because it's not a mixture that ushers. It's the cooking that ushers. That's a chiddush. And therefore, just because you know tam kikar by basar b'chalav, I would not necessarily apply it to l'chol terakula. Rabbi Kiva nami basar b'chalav ad chidushu. So Rabbi Kiva, you're right. Basar b'chalav will not be a good source for tam kikar because it's a chiddush. Eliyaf migil nachem. From the fact that the Torah teaches us that when we captured Midian, we had to kasher the pots. What is in those pots? Tam. There's no mamish of Isser there. But also, yet the Torah said you got to kasher the pots. We'll know that Tam is kicker. Rabbanan Gilul Nachum Nami Chidushu. You can't learn from Gilul Nachum because it's also unique. To a kol nois and tam lefgam mutter. We always know that once there's a tam that's left over in the kelim, the tam gets bad, and any taste that is going to put into food that you cook will be bad taste, and therefore it's mutter. The Gamrinim in the Vela, we learn from the Vela. The Hacha Aser. Yet here, even though it was nice and tam of gam, the Torah told people to kasher. That's a chiddush. So therefore, you cannot learn from there l'chol atar kula l'tamas kicker. Rabbi Kiva, Kajab Kiva, Reder of Huna, the Amar, l'ashatorah l'b'kder bas yoyma. There, by Midyan, the only pots that had to be kashered were pots that were used that day. If you wanted to use it the same day, where it was not nois and tam of gam, hilchach lav nois and tam. Lav nois and tam of gamu, and therefore it's not a chiddush, and therefore the Gilul Nachum could be a makar l'chol atar kula that tam is kicker. V'rabbanan. The Rabban holds that even a ben yoimai, if you cook in something now, and now I cook in it a minute later, that's also a tam pogum according to the Rabbanan. Come to chois, any mandate to kasher kalim by definition is a chiddush, and therefore you cannot use that as a makar of tam kicker. So at the end of the day, Rabbi Kiva learns tam kicker from Gilul Nachum, and therefore he has the pasuk of Mishras to tell you hetem mitzaref l'isser. The Rabbanan don't have any extra psukim, therefore they need to use Mishras to tell you Tam Ke'ikr, and we don't know that Hetem Mitzaref L'Isser. Amar Rabbacha B'Reder Rav Rashi, Midrabanan Nishmal Rabbi Kiva. From the Rabbanan, we should be able to see Rabbi Kiva's approach. What does that mean? Miloi Ami Rabbanan Mishras Litin Tam Ke'ikr, and they said Mikanat Tadan L'Chol Yisur Shabbat Torah. The Rabbanan who learned from Mishras, from Nazir, the Chiddush of Tam Ke'ikr, exported that information L'Chol Torah Kula. So the Rabbi Kiva Nami, who learns Mishras Lehetem Mitzaref L'Isser, Mikan Atadon L'Chol Yisur Shabbat Kula. Why don't you teach also L'Chol Torah Kula from Mishras to everywhere else? And why do we say that it only applies to certain limited cases, such as here in Nazir, and maybe it applies to Pesach, and maybe it applies to being Makter Chametz on the Mizbeach, but why is it not exported L'Chol Torah Kula? It's 6:50, so we'll stop here. So we're right on the blot. This was like a shmaka blot. I have a wonderful.
Right, Josy. Yes.